water and living things. This morning, my backyard is damp. Avian residents visit while I freshen fountain water, spread organic popcorn across decomposed granite. They celebrate my madness, consume everything in under a minute. One crow mimics a raven with a tremulous murmur, knowing I'll respond as best I can. Adolescents explore, locate the outdoor mud mat at the edge of my broken driveway. Notice water gathered within its high rubber edges. A blue-lidded, pink-heeled fledgling presses his beak into the collected fluid, flattens his head and neck to the angle of the horizon, and sips. This is evolution. Soon they will need to adapt to the limited resources we've left them. So each take a turn, assume a crouched shape, press beak tip to surface, flatten head and sip. Rainwater from a rug. Thank you. I would like to welcome Miss Ann Buxie. Ann was transplanted from Arizona desert to California chaparral and shores, and we're really grateful that that occurred. Oh, you can come on up. Come on up. She uses poetry and story to atone and to give voice to the majesty and wonder of this life, this earth. Poems and stories are acts of love, and she loves hosting and participating in poetry and storytelling events. She currently serves as Malibu's Poet Laureate. Ann Buxie.
Thank you. I'm just going to run straight through them with a little pause between. Not for clapping, but just so you know that that's the end of one poem.
Walk briskly instead of run.
Nature moves among us, rooting, blooming, fruiting, decaying, in the beauty of this glade, dumbstruck by lyrics of yellow and green. Everything I see has been loved. In a forest sanctuary, Buddha listens. A voice comes from the trees. He hears it, the Bodhi tree speaking truths without end. Its girth raining light, its fruit a blazing radiance, drenching air in sound and color. Buddha awakens. The world is not silent. To heal troubles in the village, Saroja, a Tamil elder, directs people to marry trees. I ask an arborist what trees have taught him. Patience, he replies. Have we forgotten the diplomacy of trees, the truths of their suffering? Could restoring relations with the earth be the new peace industry? Show me how to blossom my verse, to go forth, spirit wind at my back, pushing me with thistledown and willow down, soaring, drifting, dipping over the creek, with a butterfly flagging her way up columns of air, spirit wind pushing me into life. John Luther Adams says, and yet what choice do we have but to stay in touch with those older, deeper rhythms? This is why I did not hear the trees. No one told me to listen. Buddha knew, but I was ignorant of the older, deeper rhythms. Like Moses, who feared the voice flaming from the bush, I can hardly bear the sound of all that wonder rising from the earth, knelling from the sea. A carousel of vultures patrols this strand of Interstate 10, where ditches have names, where rivers once streamed. How can the desert, bare and rocky and wide, make me feel so good. Her breath unburdened, something sings my name. Westward I go to Los Angeles, her maw groping for room, muffling earth beneath coliseums of malls and clutter. Call it civilization. Earth holds her breath, her song, I can't hear my name. Today is my dancing day. Take me into the belly of the rising sun. Sweep me into a dawn never before trod. Take me through sky walls of gray, where clouds nuzzle mountains, where boundaries between earth and sky and water blur in pearls of light. Walk me in confabulations of cactus and gravel. Take me where everything is water, squalling, where everything is earth, soaking and fragrant. Pace me through choirs of yellow, flush with morning song. Take me where sprays of violet rinse me, where saguaros rise and bud and die, ribs splayed, rattling to a new refrain. Take me where everything is spirit and everything is participle, where there is no dying breath. It was morning quiet when I heard you knocking on the palm, and suddenly I knew what I was doing with my broom and clippers was no more or less important than what you, woodpecker, were doing, pecking on the trunk, or the pear trees bursting into flurries of white, or the candle's flame nibbling on the dark, or water seeping into earth's wide gullet. Goodness. The ocotillo's slender cords squawk on a sunward tack, green tongues bristle with melody, and the barrel cactus smiles like a Buddha, her crown ablaze with blossoms, free from the delusion and confusion of the world. A serpent, head swaying, tastes the air, her length bound to the sorority of dust. The tortoise pauses. We gaze, pondered by a greater obligation, before he resumes chewing, stretching toward a sprawl of green to clip another bite. Goodness, the circus of tadpoles in a monsoon shallow thick with algae, the Gila monster stalking the earth in dapples of orange and black, the toad searching for a wallow in the heat of dusk, and ants gathering fallen willow blossoms. A jackrabbit startles, then stops. Our gazes sketch a synapse. Is there harm here? Her ears flap in the heat, the air quick with mites. Right, said the jackrabbit, turning on her slender way. So I will speak of cacti succumbing to death, the saguaro, the prickly pear, the cholla, folding their limbs, joints giving way to another prayer, a heap now on the earth. I'll tell how I came to find paradise before the fledging of my death, how I once breathed air so eloquent I thought it would burst into blossom, my head swaying over the desert, my length bound to earth. The sky has fallen, thunder in the air. When I heard the song of a red-winged blackbird, then did my soul awaken. All this and yellow too? Yellow vibrates from the throat of God, defying despair. Clover, santolina, mustard, sunflower, prickly pear, deerweed, poppy. Thumpity thump, my soul crawls out of its grumply grump, blinks at octaves of yellow pedaling the earth. Yellow, a cordial, a peacemaker, convene all councils in galleries of yellow, that deliberations be invigored by the confidence of her light. I ride her waves, yellow, God's own language, reviving my faith in idioms of joy. Now, Hegel says the nature of humanity is to drive men to agreement with one another. Where is the herd that strengthens and comforts? Where the pod, the unanimity of spirit that accepts me, hears my mute appeal? Distraught, but reasonably clothed for the party, I keep it to myself. Can't show my inside slipping until you also admit to melancholy and your eyes tear in our failure puddles. Where the flock to enfold my hope, to answer my bleating? Where the hive to bathe me in warmth of buzz? Where the sheaves of worshipers that rivers bend, plunging me to their bosom? I care not to agree to disagree, to cheapen consciousness, to keep the thorn in my side. Where the trees deforest me, to free me from mirrors? How we see people might in fact make them who they turn out to be. Where the agreement? I've walked deserts and streets, beaches and markets, never introducing myself or greeting the place. I passed remnants of forests, single filing down asphalt roads, ears tuned to my own thoughts, my eyes hurrying behind me, never imagining how to befriend this place, to take up threads of spider silk and morning mist, to build a vessel for my words, verses that would bear the weight of beauty, despair, and ignorance. This is the last one. Plants dream. Plants dream wind, trunk swaying, leaves clapping, the night torn and din, branches snapping. Plants dream fungi and worms curling through roots, these the terms that bear our fruits. Plants dream flower and thorn reaching for light, dream apple and corn offer a bite. Mesquites dream bowers where cacti huddle, a saguaro towers, outgrows the cuddle. Palms dream oases, fronds shooting high, wild they tease, feather the sky. The datura dreams perfume, a startle of white, her mouth a womb blushed with light. She dreams bees to come, her breath a sweeting, they climb through her hum, her flowers fleeting. Do roses in cellophane dream fires yearning, dream in vain, dream of burning? Plants dream the earth nourished, hostilities stilled, mercies flourished. Thank you.
You're allowed to do a standing ovation. That's okay. That was beautiful. Thank you. Okay. Very excited. That just sent me to another level. And I'm inspired. Thank you. I'm inspired, Anne.
So am I.
Thank you.
So am I.
Okay. I'm going to interject a poem. This is Highway 1 North. And sort of the Big Sur area, though I hope that becomes clear. Redwoods climb cliffs along this twisted coastline as the narrow asphalt curves around angry stone faces. An army of wooden giants hold sea and precipice together. Their rugged branches crest clouds with ease. We move slowly on this slender highway, taking good care not to crumble down the cheek of jagged rocks and sink among kelp beds and starfish. Okay, so I also failed to say something. I'm very out of practice. Please turn your phones either off or onto pleasure mode. That is always how I refer to it, silent mode. I appreciate that. Next up is Anita McLaughlin. She works at Blanchard Community Library and lives in Santa Paula on the edge of the Santa Clara River. She writes about wildlife in Heritage Valley within the shadow of South Mountain. Her poems have been published in SMC Emeritus Chronicles, Askew, Canyon Chronicle, and the VCWC anthology, Nuance. Please welcome Anita.
Hello. Today, the poems that I'm reading are about the nature that I see from Santa Paula. So the first one is called April Comes to the Valley. And the valley means Heritage Valley, which is part of Ventura County. Oh, sorry. That's not going to work. Okay. I see egrets. Fold, unfold, fold, upriver and down. White flecks tossed against fresh, green South Mountain. The last of winter makes a run to the top, drops a tight frost, but spring invites us to a baby egret kind of day. A truck tinkles happy poetry through the tidy neighborhoods. Baby egrets ask for ice cream. Papa egret snacks on lizards, snapped from garden walls. Mom flaps anxious, warns us of coyotes, bobcats, ravens, mentions nothing about boys with smiles who slide into the back seats of their 57 Chevys. We know nothing about her, about spring in Montana, about a young girl, a handsome boy, until we find her poem, Blue Flowers After Rain. This poem actually happened to me. Okay. It's called The Bear. It did happen. His pelt is draped like a coat dropped in a hurry, piled into a broken chair, rough, brown, moth-eaten, dusty. He smells like old shoes, dry grass. I can't stop myself, touch his ears, imagine his breath against my skin. D of Don and D's Collectibles offers to sell him for $250. When I look into his glass eyes, touch his plastic nose and teeth, I think of him wanting a fish. I want to stand next to him, catch our dinner in a noisy, shallow stream. This is called In the Company of Hawks. From where I live, right on the other side of my fence is the Santa Clara River Valley. So all of the amazing wildlife I can see from my porch. In the Company of Hawks. I ride my wobbly bike down the street. Watch a Cooper's hawk land on the peak of my neighbor's house. Hawks and golden eagles scribe flight patterns over the river. I see them slide, gold and brown, drop silent, serious. Everything smaller than a coyote cowers, still as rocks. A dark shadow weaves through a rundo, lowers the temperature. An unlucky rabbit becomes dinner for baby hawks, tucked into a rough nest of twigs and sticks. It's not the bike that wobbles, it's me. I look up, no, it's sad but funny, okay. I look up, see the hawk, and hit a speed bump. Sit down hard on asphalt. Then I will myself to stand, pull my shaky self together, pedal back to my house, grateful, still in one piece, time still on my side. This is called Death Comes to Rancho Santa Paula. My neighbor, Sharon, calls. There is a dead bird on your deck, she says. I walk out in my slippers, inspect a swath of startled white feathers, purple feet, red flesh and blood. No head. A big, sweet dove. Probably killed by one of those cats I clap my hands at, stomp my feet at, hiss, get out, leave the poor birds alone at. Every week, fewer birds fly into the pepper tree. Fewer birds gather in the fields behind my house. Fewer birds for me to talk to, wave at. Sharon says it was probably the blonde cat she can see under the hibiscus from her window. We discuss burial or garbage can, then leave it to nature. 20 minutes later, the bird is gone. Perhaps a cat nabbed the body, or maybe a coyote. 3 doves peer down from the edge of Sharon's roof. They might know, but they aren't talking. And I didn't write any of that. That's exactly what happened. Sorry. This is called Poetry May Be a Shovel. I water tomatoes, pull weeds, dig in the dirt, one hole like another. The question is where to dig it, in Fresno or Ojai. Is the shape a supple curve into soil? Does it rhyme? Is there alliteration? Poetry may be anywhere. A lizard asleep under a car, a glass of Chablis lit by sunlight. Poetry may write an ode to a young oak or illuminate tiny purple flowers. Is poetry the sound of a train blowing through Santa Paula at 8 in the morning? Too early for wine, but perfect for poetry. Poetry may be the clink of your keys hitting the yellow bowl by the door. A nudge, a reminder that yes, this is the place. You and poetry are here. Thank you. The title of this poem is title of a song by R.E.M. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. Life as we know it is a mushroom pushing through a plastic lawn, scrabbling to find what life remains in Santa Paula, in an over 55 trailer park. Life as we know it is an aurora borealis, pulsing a phantom hiss, witnessed by 2 little girls in J.C. Penney parkas. Life, as we know it, is a cave under the cliffs of Point Vermin, a place to watch surf beat sandstone to grit, a place to wait for landslide. It is a flooded gravel pit left for dead by dredges searching gold, no place for little kids on rafts. Life, as we know it, is a moose lost in our front yard, is rats under the house, is our neighbors frozen to death in his crooked cabin. Life, the next step, may not be life as we know it. May be yellow slime at the Paris Zoo, smart, self-healing, capable of passing the marshmallow test. My sister is here, and she and I lived in Fairbanks, Alaska as kids. So part of the nature that I describe was in Fairbanks a long time ago. And this is my last poem. It's a haiku. It's called April. Young wrens flush with new flying, crash, flash into spring, find leafy landings. That's it.
Right? Are we having a good time? Is anyone else feeling inspired? Yay. Awesome. Okay. And is this working at all?
Yes.
It is? Okay. All right. Good. This poem is called Spanish Moss. After days of rain, more green than gray, celadon twirl curls about itself. Slender shoots divide and extend, tatting tangles. Each a pale suede bridal veil, draping the dark furrowed skin of this ornamental pear tree. Misty spring nights dampen and swell each curl, each stem, fortifying this gift, thickening verdant blankets over cracked black crooks. 5 years ago, a small segment shared by a living man, now a ghost, who fledged before we were ready. His spirit visits still as heron, hummingbird, and hawk. This morning, through rainy window, admiring fluff of tatters thick, a dark-eyed junco claims a short chain to line his nest of blue eggs. Thank you. Jennifer Kelley is an enthusiastic clapper, and she is also a poet and author living in Thousand Oaks. Now, she was a Venturan, and now she's gracing your city. Her poems and stories have been published in Askew, Spillway, Solo Novo, and other publications. Her work focuses around the core issues of connectedness and disconnect, personally, communally, and globally, as we progress toward a more peaceful, hopeful, and unified existence. Please welcome Jennifer Kelley.
Hi. Hi. Okay, I didn't turn it off. That's about as far as my technology skills go. It's on. Okay. Hi. It's so amazing to be standing in front of people reading poetry. This is my favorite feeling in the whole world, you guys. Thank you for being a part of that. Okay, my first poem is called Solstice Song. Gawky limbs of 30-year-old trees reach for the sky like children at a Foursquare church, imitating their elders in the hopes of reaching God. My comfort, my shelter, tower of refuge and strength, let every breath, all that I am, never cease to worship you. I shout to the earth this solstice day as a murder sweeps across the sunrise, one bird trailing after. Hummingbird streaks past my face and over the man-made rooftops into the blossoming colors of sunrise. Solstice morning overtakes the stars, blesses with light those pockets of creation that rise with the sun. I shout to the earth this solstice day because somehow this planet tips on its axis, granting us the long dark of winter with its whipping winds, the smile of spring blossoming from chill into brisk as flowers emerge from sleep, the muggy days of summer where the grasses smolder on the hills, and autumn where, in all its glory, the earth remembers that all things are subject to the cycles of life. This first day of winter, I shout to the earth. I shout to the land and the water and the sky. I shout to the heartbeat of myriad animals and the flowing sap in each breathing plant. I reach skyward like those maple trees up into the universe, not like a man at a mark, but with the wonder of a child on a swing, learning to fly. Thanks. When I think of water. When I think of water, I think of rain. I think of cleansing and forgiveness. I think of tears. I think of the creases around your eyes the last time you told me that you loved me. I know there's more to water than that. When I think of water, I think of hopping from stone to stone as I made my way, wobblingly across a creek, with my father's coaxing and outstretched hand buoying me to him, in the hope that I could hold that hand, in the hope that I could be close to him, be enveloped by his acceptance. When I think of water, I think of long Sonoma winters weighed down with moisture, damp months where I, the water child, got saturated to overflowing, and of your sourpuss face as you cursed existence and grumbled to yourself. How you made me smile, made me forget the damp, that perpetual chill, and rest instead in the warmth of your eyes when you laughed. Water makes me think of you laughing. When I think of water, I think of that half-frozen waterfall where I first walked with love, how it looked more like a photograph stilled in time that day than anything real. The way you took my hand and nodded with wide eyes and a smile, saying without words, "Isn't that something?" And it was. When I think of water, I think of you dressed in kittens, of you, my dear, dear friend, and how what spans the space between us is something incredibly simple and undoubtedly complex. And how sometimes it feels so liquid, I think we can go back in time, to that smile, to your hand in mine. Sometimes it seems like the only answer. Then I breathe, take a sip, and step forward. This is called Nature's Nuclear Option. And it's a prose poem, so it reads more like paragraphs rather than stanzas. But I don't know why I just told you that. Nature's nuclear option. When the earth gave birth to the human race, she hesitated, but hoped. They could live among the green and the lush, on the plains and surrounding the oceans. They could, she thought, be satisfied. But she wasn't sure. But then the trees started to fall, and then they settled in and named. I'm going to start that stanza over. But then the trees started to fall. Then they settled in and named the land as though it were their creation. And when they cleared forests for grazing cattle, for pecking chickens, for wallowing pigs, overgrown and greedy, she shook her head. It wasn't ideal, she thought, but not too unsustainable. She kept them humble with a flood or two, wildfires here, tornadoes there, maybe a volcano. She let them know who was boss, and the humans, obedient, feared her. Then came the factories with their plumes of poison. When the cars and the trains and the planes, the earth knew something needed to be concocted. Teach them a lesson, she thought, and it might just be enough. And then came the droughts, and so came the food shortages, the poisoned air, the dirty wet. Then rose the edges of the ocean as her polar ice caps dwindled. Then came the hurricanes, the monsoons, the tsunamis. But the humans wouldn't dethrone themselves and bow with the rest of creation. They spread and consumed, fight fire with fire. She thought it was the only way. Their reach too long. Ambitious mass killers, this plague of burn and murder all over her body. Fight fire with fire, one virus with another. She thought maybe they would learn, so she unleashed it, spreading and catching, and it quickly consumed the human world, killed millions in no time flat. When that wasn't enough, she realized they didn't know how to demur. They could no longer imagine their rightful place. The sickness had gone on too long. They could not submit in mass. Even the plague to lay them low, even this breathing death could not stop their chomping mouths consuming, would not humble them to live again within the world, rather than trying to claim it as their own. It was her world. They were the parasites now. Keep on chewing, she thought. See what happens. Okay, this one's a little lighter. Not a ton, because it's about the Thomas Fire, but...
Louder.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Ode to the Wind. Wind, old dear friend who brought me love and the feel of hands on my skin before my time. Why now will you bring me fire? Why now will you bring me the heartache that you were once so quick to soothe? I wrote, walking against the wind feels how I know it would, to love you. Once you were the hand of love. Now you whistle and whip sparks and flames. Now you batter us into calling your name, and I don't have to wonder about your gender anymore. Oh, wind, but I remember the good times, when you carried me along, when you sang to me softly that old-time song. Oh, wind, as I hear the neighbors begin to scatter, their car doors slam and luggage wheels rattle, I think you must be heartless after all. But I still remember when you used to make believe. Okay, this this is my last poem. It's called The Whispered Wow. Pounding out primal beats, I am thrown back to when humans walked among the stars, when children crested on their backs just to press their hearts a little closer to the infinite. I remember when I first saw the Milky Way, its consuming sweep across the sky. I couldn't try to name it, 8 years old, at camp. I couldn't imagine anything in the presence of the eternal. 10 years later, in the arms of a boy who I thought a man, we shivered on the stale sand of the beach and drew our own constellations. I tried to remember one or two of the classics, the ones that I'd been taught over time, but we were fond of the pizza constellation and of the Spuds MacKenzie dog. In college, I failed astronomy twice, high on poetry, starved on science. And there they were with their sky charts, dictating the names of the stars and their rotation in the sky. I learned that stars move 12 degrees an hour, much to my dismay. For such things should be left to the poets, not scientific classification. Such things should be approached with the whispered wow of a child, rather than dissected, thought to be understood and named. We cannot claim the infinite, though many humans try, and that perhaps yields a sense of power in the face of our inevitable powerlessness. Meanwhile, the little girl at camp just stares and prays never to know the death of wonder. Thank you.
I think we're all just starved. Starved for poetry, starved for hugs. I am. Speak for myself. It's all good. Thank you, Jen. Beautiful. I have another poem to interject, and then we're going to bring up a totally different voice. Benevolent Bloom. The daffodil blesses bee with pollen, tart and tangy. She sways, breezeways, taunting obedient flyers. They swoop on her, one at a time, whispering sweet supplications, shoving sticky feet down her tender throat. She lets them. Thank you. Thank you. Next up, we have a man. We have Mr. Chris Spangenberg, who has a wonderful voice, and he's a retired pilot, and my father was a retired pilot, and Chris also sort of has a voice that'll just take you there. Anyway, after a nearly 50-year love affair with the atmosphere, Chris recently retired from his flying career. For the past several years, he has been sharing with the local poetry community the images and feelings he experienced in the nearly lifelong romance. He remains astounded and appreciative that folks enjoy his work. Please welcome Chris Spangenberg.
I don't think I will.
I don't think you do either.
I think I can dispense with the
Let's
microphone.
just put it down.
I'll turn pages with my hands instead. Before I start, I want to share with you that I absolutely hate shopping malls. If there is a hell, it looks like a shopping mall. But in this hell, there's an oasis of art and creativity. For once, I'm happy to be in a shopping mall. So, I just had to say that. My dad was a painter, He was a landscape artist. And I asked him if he would teach me to paint. He said, no, you can watch me paint and you can teach yourself. Well, I never did become the painter, but I think I view the world through the eyes of a painter. And so when I do see things, I create in my own head kind of the plan for a landscape. And when I came to this display, this showing, I looked around the room and saw several pieces that spoke to me. And I went home and looked through my meager collection of little poems, and I found these to share. So they're a little bit chronological. Most of what I write about, I've seen through the windshield of some kind of a vehicle. It started, I was in a war one time, and I flew helicopters. And this is what I saw. It's a very short little poem. It's called An Awakening. Everybody can hear me, correct? Yes. And it goes like this. Dreamlike, our formation gently floats, rising and sinking on invisible inclines of atmosphere. Our fragile craft answering to rhythms old as ancient seas. Slipping through parted curtains of mist and morning light, we move like a fading mirage across an alien land. Below us, riding wisps of smoke, life smells rise, wet soil, things growing. Ancient decay. Perfumes dark and unnamed overfill my senses. From outside the dream, I hear the muted pulse of rotor blades, feel incessant life pounding in my veins, and come to know for the first time in this strange awakening the fullness of my existence. The second one is, again, seen through the windshield of a helicopter in Alaska. I was lucky enough to spend several years up there, and it's called Images from the High Latitudes of My Life. It goes like this. Somewhere, it's April, in the year of lunar landings. Here in these mountains, time knows only seasons. We are flying north to the frozen sea, following an ancient trail, a path laid down by timeless migration of caribou. The valley enfolding us opens. Mountain peaks move apart. We are delivered into a world of noiseless white, an alien space, treeless, without shadow, empty as a lonely thought. Adrift off balance, without the familiar handrails of reality, we float past scattered remains of spring at the edge of a frozen world. Later, slowly awakening, the planet leans, turning its face to the sun. A minimalist universe of incomprehensible beauty soon revealed. Low-angle light, refracted by ice, bent by inclines of atmosphere into mirage. Majestic escarpments rising offshore, collapsing mountains, inverted, dissolving. The sun rolling low on the horizon, bleeding neon orange on the land. An electric sky, blue as the echo of lightning on the retina. A perfect blue, pouring down, spilling into an orange world. Colors vibrating, colliding, merging into something unnameable. High latitude images, each a glimpse perhaps of a thing unknowable. And this one speaks to what I saw through the windshield of my truck driving across the Arizona desert. Something magical happens to me in the desert. It's called Arizona Mountains. In the distance they stand, the patient ones, ancient bones of the world, the grandmothers of time. Through millennia they silently wait, their breath warm on the desert, giving life to dust devils dancing in the middle distance. Seasons, years, then centuries drift past. At their feet, wind, fire, and floods clamor for attention. Unmoved, they stand, stoically waiting for a sign, any proof that we do care for this world. Shimmering on the horizon, clothed in the muted hues of distance, they float in that space between mirage and memory, silently watching, patiently waiting. And this one is called Spirit Forest. A spirit forest arrived last night. Floating on the wind, it settled softly on empty, sleeping streets. Drifted through windows opened by the sleepless, seeking escape from nightmare heat. Trapped in morning gridlock, drivers saw through their windshields a change in the morning light. On the edge of the wiper blade, a dusting of something unfamiliar, an accumulation of ash. Artifacts of an immense funeral pyre, incinerated remains of 1,000,000 lives, drifting souls of countless living things, displaced from its home above the sea, lifted by fire, and carried by the wind. A spirit forest arrived last night. So those, folks, are my poems. I'm glad I could share them. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, I'm going to read, well, I want to share also first. I'm going to project also if you can hear me. And I turned this off, and I'm a little uncertain that I hit the wrong buttons a couple times, and I'm afraid a channel might be messed up. So I first want to say Peg Quinn was going to join us. She is a beautiful poet in Santa Barbara, and she was exposed to COVID. And she's feeling great, she's feeling fine, but she wanted to preserve everyone here just to be on the safe side. She did say, she left me a note. She's hoping for negative results by Wednesday. No doubt today's reading will inspire and enlighten everyone. Thanks to my very talented fellow poets and to Friday for putting it all together. Enjoy and stay safe, Peg.
Yay, Peg.
Yay, Peg. She's a wonderful human. You will hear from her again, I promise. She's a great poet. I'm going to read a new poem I wrote for the occasion of Earth Day 2022. This is titled Pleading with Poseidon. Please pause from your threatening pose to teach creatures of your vast world of water that there are dangers between huge masses of land. Their predators are not only larger fishes, but some awful conditions created by man. Take time from your terrifying trident to say that all things sifting down through filtered sun between green swaying kelp beds are not food. Teach them to distinguish between plankton and plastic pieces. Warn those swimmers seeking safe passage through giant gyres of garbage, twice the size of Texas, that they must hold their breath for too great a distance. They should be prepared to turn back before trying. Signal the pods who sing their sea songs that ships and submarines also use sound. Sonar's trauma may confuse or cause them to strand themselves in the sand on a shoreline somewhere. Tell winged seabirds flying above that the darker reflections they frequently see are often heavy, sticky, and lead to death. simply fly past to avoid getting trapped there. Poseidon, please protect them. Those that crawl in darkness below, those that leap from water toward clouds, the tentacled, the vibrant, the leafy, the clawed, the finned, the curly-tailed, the minuscule and glowing, fast swimmers, shape shifters, still and hidden. Care for them. Prepare them for the darkness of man, as his greed, his ignorance, were not part of the plan. Heavy. Thanks. Next, I would love for you to welcome Enid Osborn, who served as Poet Laureate of Santa Barbara 2017 to 2019. Her collection, When the Big Wind Comes, takes place during childhood in southeast New Mexico. Her work appears mainly in West Coast and Southwest journals and anthologies, and in 2009 she was nominated by Editors of Askew for a Pushcart Prize. She's done so many wonderful things. You will love her. Please welcome Enid Osborn.
Hello. Does this do any good compared to this? No? Yes, yes, yes.
Maybe in the back.
I think if you just project, it'll be fine.
I don't project very well, so I'll go ahead and try with the
A lot
mic.
of us don't.
Yeah, okay.
There's a echo over here.
We'll do this, thanks. Okay, so, hello.
Hello.
It's such a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the museum, and I hope all of you have seen the exhibit. If you didn't have time before the reading, please go look. It's wonderful. It's just wonderful. And I want to thank Friday, and I want to thank the other poets who read before me. I feel myself among giants. Thank you. My husband Jay and I drove down from Santa Barbara, where we live, and Santa Barbara is ground zero for Earth Day. Earth Day started happening as a celebration in 1971 after a disastrous oil spill off the coast in the channel, the Santa Barbara Channel. And so Earth Day in Santa Barbara is celebrated for a week at least. You know, we've been having Earth Day events all week. We had another Earth Day reading a couple of days ago. And in honor of Earth Day, I'll start with some poems to trees, or the standing people, as they are called by Native Americans. This is a poem from my book, When the Big Wind Comes. The trees have names. Where I come from, there are no trees, or almost no trees. One may grow weary or doubt God's love, riding from one tree to the next under the sun. The trees have names. People go up and touch a tree, having come so far, or speak to one. On my mother's land, a great cottonwood lies on its side, long dead and scrubbed smooth by wind and blowing sand. Under the sun, it is golden. Under the moon, it is silver. No one ever talks of removing it or of making firewood or furniture. The tree has 4 great limbs. All of the lesser branches have broken. 3 limbs reach to the west. 1 limb reaches upward and forks at the top. I climb into that fork to wait for the horses. The crow likes that snag. She circles and circles, hollering, "Get down." This poem was written after the Thomas Fire and Montecito mudslide. And there's a line at the end, "Now we are afraid of rain." And that line refers to the deforestation of the mountains above our city that led to the mudslide. There's nothing to hold the earth in place. And so after that disaster, we did for years and still are frightened by heavy rains because the mountain may come down. So that's what that means. And this poem is written in the voice of a tree, and it's dedicated to a dear friend of mine, a poet named Maia. And all through the 90s, Maia and I were partners in actions to preserve trees. What the tree knows for Maia. Drought makes brittle, beetles drill, fire burns, water unclenches root, wind blows down, stone crushes, mud and gravity push us to the sea. Did we know it was coming? Well, those ridges in our bark that look like eyes are eyes. Trees speak every bird language and know if one shining leaf is dulled by smoke or gas. Our roots feel a distant rumble of earth and the tilling of a single ground wasp. What the tree knows is everything. So of course, we know you, dancer, your step, the drunken rush of your sap, the precise weight of your lean, your poem recited at our feet in a voice sad as ash. We danced in the grove, a bird on every finger in full anthem. At nightfall, you lay beneath giants, regarding each pale star through lace of branch and needle. You twirled to wind music, feet drumming, hair full of stems. Now we are afraid of rain. In August, beware the gale. Take care to catch the seed. Thank you. The rest of my poems today are devoted to our beloved pollinators, the bees, who are struggling, as you all have noticed. And I've incorporated bees over the years into much of my poetry. They get mentioned, or they are the focus of many poems and songs. And I just want to encourage everyone to oppose the use of pesticide and to plant bee-loving flowers, or flowers beloved by bees, or flowers that attract bees. Bees love blue flowers especially, and they see blue. And even flowers that we don't perceive blue, a bee perceives blue in a yellow flower or a red flower. So there's certain flowers that have a corona of blue, and the bee sees that and hones in. It's really pretty fascinating. So I'm going to read a series of bee poems, bee-themed poems. Whither goest thou, bee? I wait in my blue halo and hardly draw breath. Sun's mercy. A worker tires at 20 days, her many bags of gold tamped down to a thimble of clear. Nimble, sincere, she hums by sun's mercy, one verse a day. 5 bees yield 100 songs a year, a field of bees, a symphony, a song of earth. Those who weigh and wrongly say the worth of what we eat do call the honey sweet and sell it dear, but I choose music, choose the worker as my muse, and carry her song in my ear. Thank you. You're so wonderful. Gobnet was a 6th century saint, Irish saint, and she was the patroness of beekeepers, and still is the patroness of beekeepers. This poem is probably depicting her a little more earthy than she was. She was a highly educated woman, an abbess, and she was a healer, a well-known healer in her time, using honey, using the products of bees. Gobnet. She crossed the thresholds of Cork and Kerry, a jingle with jars of salve, poultice, tincture. Smock stiff with sweet drizzle, odors of sweat, burnt honey, roots too pungent for polite company. Her passing made the arm hairs rise. She stood with her baskets, petting and pinching the brushy herbs like cat's ears, while her hosts sang out their litanies of trouble. Her calm manner gave the bedridden to exhale as she hung a pot of water at the hearth, lit a stub of wax, and passed a dry stem crackling through the flame. Ruddy face wrapped, hands resting at crown, wrist, pudge, hollow, she listened to breath, dove into baskets, spun her wild pestle. When one or two familiars crawled from the folds of her skirt to circle, no one dared swat or shoo. They believed the bees instructed her. She woke and slept to bee song. Bees flowed from her hollow tree, bounced atop comfrey bell, feverfew, bone set, hummed inside the abbey walls. She had no fear of stings. Bee spit flowed in her veins. With grass smoke and a low song, she reached right in to pull out gobs of honey-dripping comb. Gold in the cloth for spraying, for spider bite. Gold in a cup of cherry bark for croup. Beeswax and elm to salve the pot burn. In every season she tended her neighbors. In death she wrapped them in sweet, saving gauze. So I think I want to read you this other one. Queen of Acacias. This is the queen speaking. The wax makers brought me to this gaping tree. They nursed my fever with powdered acacia, chucked their droplets between my jaws. I convulsed, and when I awoke from my dream of flight, I was a slave in a labyrinth of cribs. They multiply daily. I suffocate in velvet. Sly maids bring rich food and gossip from the lost world. When I panic, the sycophants pet my face. I could die. What madness it was to dance with the poets and their violas. Those rare boys drag their circles in the dust. while I am heavy with while I am heavy with heat, drugged and surrounded, taking one step, one step, one step. So the drones mate with the queen and then die. And those who live beyond this purpose are considered rather a burden for the hive. So they have few other purposes, and they're slightly larger than worker bees, and they don't have stingers, so they can't defend themselves or the hive. Drone days. Heat without respite. Drones line up in the breezeway, stir the air until their wings drop off, or alternately join with soldiers to shout away, for they cannot sting, those bold marauders, stereocilia gone mad, snouts a quiver who stretch a hand toward heaven. Each raid sets the hive back by some but not all of the honeycomb, and 100 lives or more, yet we flourish. The nurseries repapered, worker, fan, nurse, soldier, queen, jelly queen, hapless drone, scrapped and cloned. The work all about embodiment goes on. I am useful, he cries, and fans for all he is worth. His own vibration skids him toward the edge. Inside, heat makes slaves of workers. When wax caves, bee mummies are made. And I have one more. Every year in Isla Vista, there's a swarm of wild bees, and it's kind of a happening. It's kind of a festival when that happens. And it took me many years to learn that bees, when they're swarming, are the least dangerous to humans. And at that point, I learned that you could actually stand among them and hear their electric song, which is really something if you haven't done that. This is called April Swarm. Like a movie of raindrops played backward, the bees fall up into the cactus tree and make a muscle on the branch. 1,000 golden bodies condense, mold quickly into the shape of a mustard jar or a human heart that you could cup your hands around if you believed. Thank you.
I want to thank CMATO and Roya for inviting us in. Thank you. I want to thank all of the poets who shared this afternoon, Anne, Anita, Jennifer, Enid, Chris. Awesome. Thank you guys so much.